So hello there guys and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you guys are doing well and staying safe as always. Welcome back to part 2 of the F1 2023 Big Stories episode. We did a part 1 episode which went out, I believe it was on Thursday at the time of recording. I think it's a Friday night. So obviously this episode's going out Monday, so it'll be a few more days. Nice break over the weekend before this comes out. If you haven't seen part 1, go check that out. That is on the YouTube channel or on your favourite podcasting platforms. Don't forget, guys, to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're slowly creeping towards 1,000 subscribers. We need your help to get there, so make sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel. And don't forget as well to also give us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting platform. And as a reward, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Plugging aside, joining me on this episode, we have Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington, the DNF1 panel, back in full force once again. Guys, how are we all doing? Courtney, looking sharp, nice new haircut going on there. How are you doing, mate? All good?
Yeah, doing okay. Just enjoyed a day off, and a little bit of a spa treatment, let's say, with the haircut. That's as close as I'll get to having a spa, so that's why I called it spa treatment. But yeah, doing well, can't complain, and looking forward to discussing some of the topics in hand. There's one topic in particular I'm looking forward to discussing, but I'll save that for later on.
Yeah. No, it's important. I mean, I've been to the odd spa day every now and then. I mean, it might not look it, for those of you watching on YouTube, looking at me, probably a bit more like Grizzly Adams or like Forrest Gump when he went on that long 2-year run or whatever it was, and he just let his facial hair just go all over the place. But it's certainly important to pamper yourself and make sure you look after yourself every now and then. So good on you for that one. Lee, someone I could probably relate to a little bit more in that regard. How are you doing, my friend? You're good tonight?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much. I'm like Courtney and yourself. Obviously, I'm looking forward to talking about the subjects and the topics we're going to be talking about this evening. Some really juicy news coming up today at the time of recording.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, 49 days to go, or 40, will it be 48? Yeah, it will be 48 days to go, I should say. Less than 7 weeks until the F1 season starts. That is, of course, if you are tuning into this show on Monday when it goes out. Tonight is Friday night, so 51 days to go. So the reason why I say this with some level of relevance is because we do our F1 countdown on our Twitter page. And for every day that we count down, we put out a little well-known fact, or perhaps not well-known fact, related to that specific number in Formula One. I think today's one that we did was regarding Alain Prost, four-time world champion, 51 times a race winner, Le Professeur, one of the greatest drivers of all time, and in many people's mind, arguably the greatest. But of course, I'll let you make your own mind up on that one. Getting to the big stories. And the reason why this is significant is we had some breaking news today at the point of recording. A bit of a switch around in some of the teams. F1 silly season, we saw going towards the back end of 2022 that the team principals were having a bit of a merry-go-round for silly season. One team that we saw a departure from was Williams, with Jos Capito leaving the team, and we were expecting a new Williams team principal to be announced in due course. We can now confirm that that has happened, and it is James Vowles. That's right, that James, the famous one on the Valtteri Bottas "It's James" radio messages. He is now taking up the job as team principal of the Williams team, leaving the role at Mercedes, former head of race strategy. And this is quite a coup for Williams. I was a little bit worried that Williams were going to really struggle to find a decent team principal to take on the role, take on this revival at Williams, which has more stuttered rather than risen from the ashes, it's fair to say. And guys, I guess the first question has to be, what are your thoughts on this one? I think this is actually probably the best possible appointment they could have had, Lee.
Yeah, well, firstly for James, obviously, congratulations to him. Well done. Good pay rise, nice new job title, and any perks that Williams provide. Well, I don't know if they provide different perks to Mercedes, but there'll still be nice perks, I'm sure. So you obviously have to him, and obviously it's a step up in his career. The question I wonder is, obviously he's worked with the Brackley base team for quite a big chunk of his career. Obviously through the different guises, and Jenson Button obviously being the advisor at Williams now. and has been at the Brackley-based team for several years himself. I wonder if there was some link up and harmony with, and also with the Mercedes team being obviously the manufacturer supplier, that maybe he's moved the operation. Obviously, I don't know. That's just me hypothesizing. It would be irrelevant, and he was not involved at all. But definitely a nice surprise. Obviously, well done on James.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I said, it's important to, acknowledge certain connections like that. That Jenson Button was a driver, was a name actually, that was linked with this job. I thought for what it was worth, it was one of those to sort of spark up a little bit of excitement or something like might be a little bit of fun. I didn't think Jenson, with all due respect to the former Formula One world champion, was in any realistic position to take on a job of that magnitude. We often associate sometimes how former footballers, and we compare that and say, oh, they take up a manager's role, they get their experience, or, and it either works or, they're a bit out of their depth. I think in Formula One, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I think it's much easier to promote someone from within a team existing at an operations level into that role, or someone outside in the same way that Williams have done here with James, than bringing in a former driver, someone like Jenson Button, regardless of the experience and success that he has had. Courtney, are you surprised by the nature in which this has happened? Because this one came out of left field. I think we kind of expected it to, regardless of who was going to get the job. But for someone like James Vowles to leave Mercedes, this is a huge loss for Mercedes. But at the same time, Mercedes haven't introduced anything like garden leave in the same way that we had with Ferrari and Matteo Binotto, where he's committed to not join another team for 12 months, whereas James is going to go straight into this Williams team with all the knowledge that he's picked up from Mercedes, everything that comes with it from the experience. Are you surprised by that?
I have mixed opinions on it. I completely agree that it's a loss for Mercedes. I mean, the timing of it is what sort of concerns me from a Mercedes perspective. To lose somebody that's had such a pivotal role with that team for such a long time, as Lee has already touched on, but that happened right on top of pre-season testing. It is a tad concerning, but maybe Mercedes have known that this has been coming for a while, and they've already have somebody in mind to replace James and start afresh for the new season. On the other side, I'm not completely surprised by it, given the partnership that Mercedes and Williams seem to have. They seem to be building a technical partnership, so this may help sort of continue to build that relationship between Williams and Mercedes. And I think for Williams themselves, it's a great move for Williams. Like you, Adam, I was really worried about the direction that Williams were heading in. There was nothing about that team before this appointment that made me feel this team is actually going somewhere. They were languishing right at the bottom last season. I don't expect them to be making a massive stride this season. But if you've got people like James Vowles in your team, if he's able to build anything like what he built during his time at Brackley, the Williams team could well have something to look forward to moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, James being one of the youngest team principals in the paddock, if not the youngest, at 43 years of age, he's certainly going to have his work cut out for him. But a man with over 20 years experience in the sport, especially working with the likes of Mercedes, as you mentioned, guys, I think this is a huge appointment for Williams. And of course, it's a huge project. And I think a lot of us will probably worry that Williams are going to be one of those teams that, may even be at risk long term of possibly selling itself, given how F1 is currently in a very strong place right now. And if you're not competitive, you're going to get left behind. And that opens the door to potential new suitors like Porsche, for example, or even Andretti, who are looking to get on the grid. They did explore that route before with Sauber before it fell through. Maybe Williams would provide an opportunity. Lee, I know you had an interesting comment or two to make on this one. Similar to the question I asked Courtney, are you surprised in the nature in which Mercedes have allowed someone as good and as important to James Vowles as he was to them go to another team straight away rather than impose any sort of gardening leave on him?
There's two trails of thoughts. The first one I'm going to say is the cynic in me, being, was James really that good? Obviously, I know he's good at his job, but the amount of strategy mistakes Mercedes have made when the pressure is on, maybe Mercedes are like, right, okay, that's fine. You've not been really too good at your job. We've made some mistakes. We need someone fresh. We need to challenge Red Bull beyond the seat. So let's go someone different. Yeah, why not? You can't do any worse. I'm sure they can. They can go be Ferrari. But
Oh, low blow. Really, like 10
I
minutes
said it was
into
a
this
cynic
show.
in me. Okay, I'm getting the cynic bit out before I get into the other point. So there could be that aspect of it, but as I said, that's the thing. I mean, what I think really is I think it's a power play from Mercedes, and I mean by a power play, as you already mentioned, Porsche, is keep Williams in the Mercedes sphere of influence. Do you have someone that's had worked for Mercedes over the last 10 years? Probably going to, as a team, they already use the Mercedes power unit. Porsche, obviously, the Red Bull deal fell through, still sniffing around for a team. Mercedes obviously won't want to lose a customer team or their B team that sometimes Williams is referred to, although it's not officially a B team. And having someone that's worked at Mercedes there leading the team maybe keeps Williams within the Mercedes sphere of influence and not get distracted by looking at this nice new manufacturer that wants to buy into a team. And I think that's where it is more of the power play from Mercedes, that they've gone no guarding leaves, like, yep, get in, because Williams is in a happy mood. They've got the new team principal and they'll back Mercedes in political arguments in the FIA that obviously is ongoing now with Andretti and the back to the engine supplier and Porsche. And I think that's really where how I see it from Mercedes.
I mean, you guys reckon that this potentially has... I mean, that's a really good point. I should mention, Lee. I think that's a fair point, and I think there's a lot to that in terms of the political element of it. Do you feel perhaps that Mercedes are a little bit more willing to let someone like James Vowles go, who's been an integral part of this team, whether he's considered a strategy guru in the same way as someone like Hannah Schmidt at Red Bull is remains to be seen, and probably not for me to say. But, of course, you know, we had Mike Caulfield on the show last season, who worked at Mercedes under James, and he said to me a lot that, you know, James was one of the best in the business. So, you know, I can imagine from his testament alone, that's obviously going to be a big loss to a team like Mercedes. But do you feel that this has somewhat to do as well with the fact that because Mercedes and Williams, despite the technical partnership that they share, so it seems like a seamless switch, they're not really competing with each other right now. You know, Mercedes are trying to win a world championship next season. Williams are just trying not to finish last.
Williams are trying to win a point.
Well, I mean, they won points last season.
Yeah, I know. But it sounded better when you say winning. Make it sound a bit more positive.
Well, I mean, it depends on who I'm trying to appease here. As you can tell on this show, I'm not trying to appease Mercedes or Williams fans here, so I feel like I can just be blunt on this one and ignore all of that one. But please subscribe and like the pod if you are Mercedes or Williams fans. But do you guys think this has more to do with, and they're quite comfortable because of the fact that Mercedes and Williams are just at polar opposites of the F1 hierarchy right now?
No, there's definitely a massive political element to this, because if you sort of go back a couple of years ago, there was a decent partnership building between Mercedes and then Racing Point, who obviously developed a car that was similar to the 2019 Mercedes, which led to the nickname Racing Point. Aston Martin have since taken over and have ambitions of their own to win a championship on their own accord, do it their own way. So they've kind of lost that that political backing to an extent. So they sort of need Williams more than they have in the past. Because if you think about it's said a lot about the Red Bull Alfa Tauri partnership. That definitely does give Red Bull a slight advantage, because there are two teams owned by the same person, which does give them a political advantage. And we've seen how Red Bull turned the tables on F1 politically, from struggling in 2014 to then, the regulation shifting to suit Red Bull for them to go and win the championships in 21, 22. So maybe Mercedes have realised what's going on here and they're reacting accordingly, and they really want, a strong backer in the way that Red Bull have with Alfa Tauri.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first time that Mercedes have let crucial people go to other teams. I mean, we had Paddy Lowe go to the Williams team in the past. Obviously, that didn't work out very well when he was in the hot seat there. But as I said, it kind of, transmits into or exemplifies this Mercedes-Williams partnership that has never really been official. but has kind of always existed on a technical level. I mean, look at Valtteri Bottas when they brought him in to Mercedes, George Russell being another driver. There's always been that connection between the two sides there. So, as I said, I think this is a good move all around. I think this is definitely one that hurts Mercedes too. I don't think we should ignore that. But Lee, I think you made a great point that if Mercedes are looking to try and improve on strategy for 2023, which is an area that I think we can all agree they have to improve on if they're going to beat the likes of Red Bull and Ferrari, although, perhaps less of Ferrari, who tend to beat themselves more than anyone else at the moment. It might not be the worst thing in the world to bring a fresh pair of eyes into this team or promote someone within that may be able to do a bit of a better job in that regard. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, well, it's not so much a better job because obviously James has experience in that, but a different job. And I think that's the key is the different, because it shakes things up. I mean, all the teams have computers, but the top three especially are really good with their strategic programming and their computers, software simulations. And then they take into account other teams' normal strategic choices and what how the other teams normally react. So having a different strategist who internal promotion or recruit for another team has a different outplay, especially at the beginning of the season. You can't simulate that. You can't predict that. So it shakes things up, not just for Mercedes and how they operate, but for the other teams because they can't predict how Mercedes will operate strategically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will be interesting to see how that all sort of works out. I want to move the conversation on to a bit of a rumor. And this is something that we haven't prepped for. So I'm going to see what happens when I bring this to the guys here. I've been hearing rumors, and I think you guys would have heard about these on and off for a while now, about F1 looking at new ways to spice up qualifying. Now, naturally, I'm one of those people that thinks, why do you need to mess with a good thing? Arguably, sometimes one of the best things about F1 is the current qualifying format. We had this a few times in the past. Bernie Ecclestone wanted to trial that elimination qualifying, which lasted, 2 or 3 races. It was absolutely dreadful. There were other qualifying formats that we had in the past that, of course, we're not going to list them all because some of them were good, some of them not so much for different reasons. Apparently, there are rumours going around now that F1 are going to trial a revised qualifying format at 2 events in 2023. This revised format, one that you may have heard before, guys, if you're listening in, basically we'll see different tyre compounds mandated for each stage of qualifying. And the way that you may have heard it that I'll just relay to you guys, in Q1, they're going to use the hard tyres only, Q2, the mediums, Q3, the softs. Now, guys, with that information, I want to get your thoughts on this one. I'm not a big fan of changing qualifying, but in your minds, would something like that make qualifying a bit more exciting or not? What do you reckon, Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like you, Adam. Like when you mentioned the fact that I'm thinking of tinking qualifying, it made my heart drop because I'm fed up with this notion that qualifying is the problem with the race weekend. There are other things about a race weekend that can be improved. I think we've done enough with qualifying, but I suppose I'm guessing that the idea they have is that by making the tyre choice mandatory in qualifying, it stops the advantage that the bigger teams have because some of the teams, particularly last season, Red Bull and Ferrari, were so fast, they were so ahead of the others that they were able to put on a tyre in qualifying that would give them even more of an advantage during the race. So I'm assuming that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to limit strategic advantages for the bigger teams on race day.
I think it's important to remember with this that last season F1 outlawed the old qualifying Q2 rule with tyres that teams had to start the race on the tyre they set their fastest Q2 time on, assuming they qualified in the top 10, of course, with the exclusion of sprint races, for example. So, the days of teams needing to think, oh, do I use the medium tyre on a track where softs would be faster, just so I can start the race on a better race tyre? They don't need to do that anymore. They could if they wanted to. If they needed to get rid of a set of mediums and they had the pace to do it, that's absolutely fine. But they didn't have to do it anymore. There was no tangible benefit to doing that if you had more sets of softs available. So I totally get that. And, it's something that they tried to get rid of to try and make qualifying a bit more interesting. I think what they're trying to do here And this might be a bit far-fetched, but I think this is kind of around about where the logic might be with them. I know that sounds a bit like an oxymoron, but bear with me on this one, guys. I feel that one thing we don't see a lot of is a direct comparison over which teams are good at getting their tyres up to temperature versus others. Now, when you get a little bit more jeopardy when it comes to qualifying in this format, you may find that in Q1, which is the session where it's open to the most possible surprises because everybody's involved, by putting these teams on the hardest possible tyre, it may be tougher for some of the teams that have a harder time warming their tyres up than it will do for others. And the expectation, I believe, would be that the faster guys may have a harder time getting the hard tyre to work versus the smaller teams who have a much better operating window on their car, but not an ultimate peak in performance. So I feel like they're trying to introduce a little bit of jeopardy here, where in Q1, we may see one team that struggled to warm their tyres up in qualifying, I think, was Red Bull, for example, compared to Ferrari. If Red Bull struggled to get the hard tyres going in Q1, where everybody's mandated on them, someone like an Aston Martin, for example, who's relatively close to them in the midfield, I suppose, might be able to close up that gap. And it may create a scenario where Red Bull might be looking over their shoulders. And it might give an opportunity to some of the slower teams who, may not suffer as much, get a little bit closer. So I feel like that's kind of where they're going with this. And of course, as qualifying goes along, you go to mediums, similar thing, but perhaps not as much, and then the softs. Something like that. That's what I think they're trying to achieve here. Because they had something that when they wanted to introduce racing with no tyre blankets or qualifying with no tyre blankets, but I think that's kind of been put on the back burner a little bit. Because of safety issues and drivers get involved. So I feel like this is kind of a happy medium that they might trial. I mean, what do you reckon, Lee? Do you think this is something that could possibly work, assuming I haven't kind of just said the same thing that you're about to say, as I often do?
Yeah, I mean, if both of your logic and theories are correct, I would agree that it's definitely something to consider. Then make it to make the field more level. I do think that the current qualifying I'm quite happy with it. I much more enjoy it compared to previous versions of qualifying we've had in the past. But if increasing jeopardy, it makes sense. Although if they really want to increase jeopardy, just have a lottery wheel. Right, this is the tyre. And it's like slicks on a wet circuit. Yeah, that's jeopardy. Everyone's got slicks on a wet surface. Or wet tyres are intermediate tyres on a dry surface. See how long you can make them last. That's jeopardy. Come on.
Well, we
can't make it exciting.
We can't even have wet tyres on a wet circuit these days, Lee. So I'm not quite sure what drives will do. You literally just send a duck round and let that do it. Just have like branded. Obviously, I'm not condoning painting ducks. That's animal cruelty. But can you imagine a hypothetical scenario where they did that on a wet track? Just have a little Ferrari cap on one, stuff like that, and
it'd be jeopardy. That's if you want to spice it up. You get the slicks. People just aquaplane off on the wet circuit, and on a dry circuit, there'll be slicks within a two corners, and then they'll just slide off.
Well, we have a few ducks at mud shoot, so maybe Adam, we can get in contact with a few people,
and
get this idea. Let's get this idea in motion.
Well, we can give them special names, couldn't we? I mean, let's think of some off the cuff. Obviously, Sir Lewis Duckington.
Oh,
there
wow.
You go. Just right off the cup there.
How long have you been sitting on that one, Adam?
Longer than I probably should. But I'm trying to... that's the first one I could think of. It was literally just come to the top of my head, and I thought, well, Hamilton's got a name that you can kind of change into that, and it works. So...
Pierre Duckley.
I like that. Pierre Duckley, I like that. We'll have to try and be a bit more clever, but I don't know many breeds of duck. I mean, mallard. I'm trying to think of mallard.
We have runner ducks. So they run. You could do like the running ducks, running fast, F1.
Yeah, could think of that. Carlos Swan. Yeah, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it?
Okay, I think we need to move on from this because it's getting worse and worse as we go along.
Let us know, guys, if you've got some clever duck pun names for Formula One drivers. We've done a few there. Lewis Duckington, Carlos Swan, and Pierre Duckley. I think it's probably as good as we can manage. So let us know in the comments, guys. It'd be a bit of fun. The best ones, we'll read them out on a future episode. The best ones, we'll have to make an incentive for our lovely followers to do this. I think I'm not a big fan of tinkering with qualifying. I think it's one of the best parts of the weekend. On a Saturday as well, it's become so good, it's its own separate event. And we do get the odd shock every now and then. It's not like it's, with the current format and with new teams as well. If they come in a few years' time, that will change things again and create a little bit more jeopardy. So we'll wait and see. I thought it'd be fun to just introduce that because it was literally just rumours going around again. So we will have to wait and see what happens on that one. The next thing I wanted to talk about is McLaren. Now, McLaren next season, this is going to be really, really interesting because, of course, they're going to want to try and move up the field. Last season, they started off quite slowly. In fairness to them, you know, Daniel Ricciardo was not performing at the level that I think a lot of us hoped he would do. And as a result, he's not going to be driving on the grid next season as McLaren bought him out of his existing contract. They've brought in Oscar Piastri amid all the controversy during silly season that he was a part of in the summer. And it's quite an exciting partnership. We're going to have Lando Norris in there. For the first time, I think he's going to be considered the outright team leader, and as a result will take that responsibility. How will he cope with that? We'll have to wait and see. I want to focus first on Oscar Piastri, and this is a driver, as we said, at the centre of this controversy in the summer when Alpine had announced after Alonso was joining Aston Martin that Piastri would be promoted to second driver. Not going to go into the contract stuff, but Piastri quite emphatically responded by saying, this is not the case. This isn't going to happen. I've not signed anything to say that I'm going to be the second driver with the team. As a result, was pretty much put on the sidelines, in the bleachers, if you like, wasn't able to do any more development work on the car. I think the only time he's drawn a modern day F1 2022 car was when he did that Abu Dhabi test with McLaren when he got released from his contract. So not a lot of experience on his shoulders. But this is a guy, remember, that has had an illustrious junior career. Everything that's been put in front of him, he's grown and grown and grown into arguably one of the most exciting talents that we've seen come into the sport for a long, long time. So I guess the question is, guys, how is Oscar Piastri going to cope in 2023 with all of that to catch up on?
He has that classic scenario where he's going into a team that is, you know, it's Lando's team. Lando has built that, you know, from the very start. And then obviously, as Carlos Sainz moved on to Ferrari, that obviously, you know, put Lando into the situation where he could possibly do it. We always thought that Ricciardo would go in and be the team leader. It didn't turn out to be that way. I think Lando has this unique way to be, you know, has a bubbly, positive attitude around him. So he's very good at building the team around him. It'd be interesting to see what kind of challenge Oscar, you know, poses to Lando. I think it's probably going to be Lando's biggest challenge since Carlos Sainz left. But I think they've got two very exciting young drivers in their team. And I'm looking at Lando Norris's situation, and I'm just wondering if McLaren's ambitions moving forward match Lando's, because I'm seeing other teams like Aston Martin, you know, Andretti are being bullish about the future if they were to come in. Audi, there are a lot of teams that are coming up with a lot of talk that want to go for, go for podiums and world championships, and I'm not seeing that as much for McLaren. I'm really hoping that McLaren do crack on and take that team back to the level where I feel they should be. But if they don't, I do feel Lando Norris is one of those drivers that needs to be thinking, look, I'm a podium winner. I was close to being a race winner. Maybe I should start looking for, you know, a bigger team that can take my career to the next level if McLaren don't match my ambitions.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, going back to Oscar Piastri as well, we obviously need to talk about him on this as well. You know, new team principal in Andrea Stella, you know, taken over from Andrea Seidel. That's obviously had to fill a hole there, but one perhaps McLaren had anticipated for a little while, hence why both announcements were made very quickly towards each other. With Oscar Piastri, as I said, a lot that he's going to have to catch up on. He's going to have to do a lot of work. I think a lot of us mere mortals that just watch the sport and aren't actually involved in the day-to-day workings probably don't appreciate how much time and effort needs to go into getting up to speed. We just assume they jump in the car, and if they're naturally good, it works. If not, they struggle. We've even seen great drivers like Daniel Ricciardo struggle when he's not quite up to it compared to how he's been in the past. With Oscar Piastri, there's going to be a lot of pressure on his shoulders, a lot of expectation. McLaren in the past, before Lando Norris, have only really given drivers no more than 2 seasons to demonstrate that they really have what it takes. And more often than not, before Lando, they used to fall to the wayside and out of the team altogether, sometimes out of Formula One as well. So, Lee, in your opinion, if Oscar Piastri does have a slow start to the season, how much time do you think he really needs, or McLaren will afford him, before he has to start demonstrating the ability and the quality and consistency that many of us that followed him in the junior categories would often associate him with?
For me, over the course of this coming season, I think there will be 3 clear lines that McLaren will measure him against Lando. Obviously, if he surprises all of us and he comes out of the box and he beats Lando out the bat, then McLaren won't have to worry. But I think it's really down to let him see how he goes until the European season. Just drive the car, learn the strategy. Don't worry about the results too much. Obviously, better results, great, but don't just bring the car home. Don't crash it. Don't cost us money. And then once you reach the European season, it would be how you done, evaluate, see if where we can improve until the summer break, and get it better. And then from the summer break to the end of the season, it'd be very much let's get going. You can do this. If he fails to meet any of those lines that I've just said, I think, especially come the end of the season, McLaren will be like, okay, this hasn't been great. This is not where we want to. Great, this has been amazing. Well done. You've really taken it to Lando. You've beaten Lando. You're on par with Lando. But those are the lines that I can nice breaks in the season that they can measure the performance over the season. One thing that I will add about Oscar is I'm really looking forward to seeing Mark Webber back on the grid, obviously being the line. He's manager. And he gets some Mark Webber interviews again, and they'll be like, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be quite fun. We'll have to find a way to try and segue Seb into all of that now. He's not driving a Formula One car next season. Their relationship's always been a bit better since the old Multi-21 incident, but it's always fun to watch them two catch up. And yeah, I agree, Lee. I absolutely would not say no to a bit more of Mark Webber on the F1 broadcast, and to get his insight, always often associated as the no-nonsense F1 driver, very talented as well. So, we'll have to wait and see. But of course, important to acknowledge that with Oscar Piastri, there are going to be caveats to how we measure his performance and try to understand where he's at. And I'm pretty sure McLaren will do the same thing as well. So he won't have all the time in the world. There will be a steep learning curve for him. But as I said, anyone that's followed him in his junior career know that this guy is serious and he very much is the real deal. But when we said this about Stoffel Van Dorn, and, look what happened to him. It's always sometimes about timing. I think unlike Stoffel, the timing is a lot more convenient for Oscar. I think he's in the right place at the right time to grow and add to his already impressive stock. So we'll have to wait and see. Moving on to Lando Norris. And as I said already, this is a big year for Lando Norris. And I think, Courtney, you already talked about this already. A lot of big teams are going to be keeping an eye on Lando Norris, including Audi, for when they come onto the grid in 2026. I know that's a name that Audi have often thought could be a guy to lead their project when they come into F1 in 2026. Come into it properly, I should say. This is going to be a big year for him. And, as we mentioned already on this show, that Lando Norris in the past, whilst he has demonstrated, other than perhaps the first season with Carlos Sainz, that he is the real deal and he's the outright number one driver in this team, but he's never really held that mantle. This is a guy now this season where everything that comes from McLaren this season is going to have to come through him. I'm talking how to set up the car, the development path, how to get the absolute most out of this car, the feedback that comes with it. And from what I've heard, Lando Norris is very good at providing the feedback. He is going to be leading this team. And that's a lot of responsibility for a young man like him. Was he now 22, 23 years of age?
Yeah.
That's a lot of responsibility on a young man's shoulders to spearhead a team like McLaren, one with the rich history that it has, in an upwards trajectory that they seem to be going in and hopefully will continue to grow in over the next few seasons. And on top of all of that, he has to now deal with the burden of having to make sure that the up-and-coming young star that's entering his team in the same way that he was when he first started out at McLaren, he has to obviously work with him, help develop him, but also keep him at arm's length so that he doesn't get superseded in the same way that he did to his teammates before him. It's a lot to put on a young man's plate. But how do we feel about Lando Norris? Because from my experience and from what I've seen of him, I think he's absolutely ready for this, and I think he's going to nail it. But, of course, we won't know until we see him out on track in that role come lights out in Bahrain in 7 weeks' time. Lee, what are your thoughts on Lando going into 2023? Can he handle it?
I think he will step up to the challenge. Obviously, as you mentioned, it will be a different environment for him. And yes, he provides his feedback and everything, but he, as you both already alluded to, he hasn't been in the position as the sole leader. From what I hear, Daniel, although he may not be driving very well, was really on it behind the scenes in the feedback and pushing for development and leading the team from behind, although he wasn't delivering the track performances. So it's a very big shoes Lando has to fill from Carlos to Daniel and now Daniel to Lando. I'm sure Lando can fill that. He's now got 4 seasons under his belt. So he's an experienced driver. He may be a young driver, but he's an experienced driver. And he's at home in the McLaren team, and they're very comfortable. Zach talks about the McLaren family, and you could right now, although other teams are circling, Lando is very happy in the McLaren family. And until, hopefully it doesn't happen from a McLaren perspective, but until that happiness dissolves, or Lando will deliver. And obviously the big question I have is, will Lando have the max effect on Oscar, and effectively like outperform Oscar, and that's it? Oscar he's the Van Dorn, that's it. Or can Oscar stand up, and it's going to be really stand up to Lando, I should finish that, and be really enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Corny, I want to get your thoughts on this as well, because, you know, as we said already, whilst myself and Lee, based on what he's just said, feel the utmost confidence that Lando Norris will be able to handle the pressure that's going to come from this new position of autonomy, if you like, with McLaren being the marquee guy, the star within the team. Obviously, this is a position he's not experienced before in terms of pressure. And we saw last season when Lando really upped his game, when we said he kind of had to go beyond just being that young man who, you know, has a lot of joy about him. He's fun to interview and talk to. He needs to be more business, and he did that. He's going to have to go another level on top of that as well. And I'm quite intrigued to get your thoughts on how you think he's going to handle this, and what happens when Lando is subject to some level of jeopardy or poor form. Because this is something Lando's not done either. He's been really good up to this point, but we've not really seen him in a position where he's really had to pull something out of the bag when he's under the cosh.
Yeah, I think with Lando, Lando's probably going into one of the most vital seasons in his career today. Obviously, the first one is the most vital because that's where you're establishing your name and you're putting your stock out there for, you know, not only for himself, but for the other teams. You got a situation where, you know, you got this talk of, you know, other teams looking at Lando, but at the same time, you can't ignore Oscar Piastri. Like, this guy has the potential to be the real deal. Adam, you've been a fan of this guy for a while. You know, you was an advocate to get him into the F1 grid for the last season or two now, and he fully deserves his seat. So I have no doubt that Oscar Piastri is going to be a challenge for Lando. But it's just going to be vital for him to take that next step. I think getting that elusive race win would do him the world of good, because he was so unlucky in Russia in 2021. He did all the right things, but it's just that those little moments when it comes to rain, we all know how cruel the weather can be in F1, that robbed him of that. I think getting that first race win would be massive for him. I think as I said before, what he does in terms of, you know, the energy that he creates has that way of drawing a team and actually support from people from various backgrounds to, you know, support Lando. He really has that way of drawing people to him. So he has those natural leadership qualities already. That's set. But you're right, we've never seen Lando under massive jeopardy, you know, poor form. And these are the kind of things that every driver has to go through at some point. I think if you have a look at Lewis Hamilton, for example, I think he learned a lot from the 2011 season where he kept on having, you know, multiple accidents, mainly with Felipe Massa. But that was Lewis Hamilton's worst ever season. And He learned a lot from, and he actually even 2016, he didn't have the best of seasons by his standards. Lost to Nico Rosberg, and he went to the next level from 2017 onwards. So a little bit of poor form can make or break a driver. And you're right, Adam. It'd be interesting to see how Lando reacts when he has to deal with, an incident for a field season.
Yeah. And of course, you're going to have to block out the distraction of eagle eyes watching Lando Norris in, with all due respect, much bigger teams at the moment than McLaren that I'm pretty certain will be very invested in what Lando does this season. Because, of course, the big question mark, as we mentioned with Lando Norris, is that we don't know how he's going to cope in a position where he has to be the outright leader in a team, despite his incredible talent and young age. It's something he's not going to be able to hide from anymore. Not saying he is, but he's got nowhere to hide this season. And I think if he comes out trumps, as we hope he will do, I think that's going to be the final checkbox that a lot of teams that may be keeping tabs on him need to check off before we say, yeah, this guy's the real deal. We need to get him in. And obviously that's why some teams, even like Audi, obviously going to be keeping an eye on him for 2026. So we'll have to wait and see. But it's a really exciting dynamic going on at McLaren, not just for Lando Norris, but for Oscar Piastri as well. Two drivers that a lot of people are going to be keeping tabs on this season for the future. I want to do something a little bit different. And another new piece of news that come out this week, Drive to Survive, Season 5, coming out February the 24th on Netflix. No, we've not been paid by Netflix to plug this, but of course, if they're feeling generous, let me know and we can sort something out. But of course, I didn't watch it last season for the obvious reason, because I didn't want to watch I bet you did. I can imagine you throwing everything you had at the screen watching Abu Dhabi 21 all over again. And I think that was part of the reason why I didn't really want to watch it, because I'll be brutally honest, being regular fans that we've been for some time in this sport, Netflix's adaptation of Drive to Survive is not necessarily for that particular type of fan. It's more aimed at newer fans that want to get into the sport, fans that probably haven't watched much Formula One or didn't really have much of an interest in it. They see the way that it's dramatised, the way that it's shown. You get an insight on the drivers and that close-up element to it that you wouldn't be privy to when you watch it every other weekend. And you fall in love with the sport as a result. And I must say they've been incredibly successful and a huge catalyst for that upsurge in popularity and growth that F1 has enjoyed over the last 4 or 5 years. This year, of course, the championship was a little bit more tame in terms of the controversy and everything that went with it, minus the cost cap issue, of course. So I guess, guys, what do we think? Are we watching Season 5? Courtney, are you going to return to watch it?
What I'm going to do when it comes up, I'm going to look through the episodes, and if there's any episodes that are just about Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, then that's when I will be watching, because I feel that the real spicy atmosphere and drama was happening more behind the scenes than it actually was on track with this whole cost cap scandal. So yeah, I'm going to be looking for the Toto Wolff Christian Horner content. That's what I'm here for.
Well, aren't we all? Maybe we'll get more of that in 2023. Who knows? I think we needed a year off that, fortunately, and now we're ready for it again. Hopefully, we'll see. I'm kind of intrigued to see the British Grand Prix, the episode on that, if they're following Ferrari for that one, or if there's any insight to what happened there, because obviously I want to see a bit more unfold between what was said between Leclerc and Binotto, and of course the immediate fallout that required Binotto, in his mind, to go and visit Charles in Monaco to try and mend bridges, if you like. Obviously that didn't work, because over the season he ended up leaving his job anyway. So yeah, we'll have to see. Lee, obviously you watched last season's Drive to Survive. Anything in particular that you're looking forward to seeing in this season's version?
Well, probably the same as the previous seasons. There's 2 reasons why I watch it. Firstly, as you already mentioned, behind the scenes stuff that you don't really see from a normal coverage. So I do watch it for that because it's just interesting. Secondly, Gunter Steiner. I mean, they should just call it Drive to Survive Gunter Edition. And I mean, I'll watch that. Just Gunter.
If he had his own spin-off show,
yep,
I would be on that. That would be straight on my favourites right away. That would be on my list. That'd be the first on my list.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, come on Netflix, listen to this. You need a Gunter Edition spin-off.
There you go. That's I think that's a pretty good idea. I'd certainly watch that. I'd love to. It kind of has one of those old 90s sitcoms things where you got like Home Improvement or something like that. I'm trying to think one off the top
It
of my
reminds
head.
me of The Office.
Yeah, there
That's what it
you
reminds
go.
me of.
There you go. That's exactly a great idea. So, yeah, Netflix, if you need a few people for Drive to Survive Season 6, look no further. And we'll try and... I don't really think there's much we can really say about that. I think we'll just have to roll with it.
Maybe we could do our own. We could do like our own editing because I'm gonna try and learn some video editing. So maybe we could do some like best moments or behind the scenes, or like a little bit of our chatter before we go on do the actual recording, and see how that goes. I see the look in your face, Adam. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking that you can just apply your own context in whatever narrative you want, because that's what Netflix do. So
yeah, exactly.
there you go.
It'd be Christian Horner. It'd definitely be pro Christian Horner, 100%.
Maybe there's a forbidden romance brewing there between Christian and Toto. All you got to do is just be a little bit clever. It's kind of like the old rom-com thing where they play hard to get and then they're like sweethearts at the end of it. It sounds lovely. I'd watch that. Anyway, let's move on to something a bit more normal on this F1 podcast, and let's talk about Alpine. Now, Alpine.
Normal Alpine. Ooh, I mean, that's a strong sentence there, Adam.
I know. I felt like I set it up well, and then I just brought in some more controversy because that's what we do on this show. We keep our listeners on our toes as best as we can. But no, I mean, Alpine next season, a team that I think we can all be honest about, had some issues trying to keep their house in order in terms of keeping their drivers happy. We had Esteban Ocon, who I'm pretty sure is still telling everybody that he beat Fernando Alonso in a championship. And to be fair to him, he did. And he did a bloody good job at it, with all the usual caveats that I'm sure people will throw at that for obvious reasons with Alonso. But he's going to be partnered up with Pierre Gasly. Now, we're not going to get into the details of why these two are reportedly not the best of friends, but this was a lineup that, despite the fact that everybody that's associated with French motorsport would absolutely drool over, this one could get very, very fiery. So, guys, what do we think for next season? Are Alpine going to be the team to watch internally?
I'm going to reply to your question with another question. Do you think that Esteban Ocon's going to get his second push or perhaps slap? Because let's remember, he already had his treatment for Max Verstappen. Is he going to get his second dose from Pierre Gasly? I reckon it's going to get close behind the scenes, I reckon it's going to get tasty.
I had to think where you were going with that one. I was trying to think, what are you talking about? Who's hit him? But then, yeah, no, fair enough. But I don't think it's going to get violent or anything crazy like that. I think we're kind of exaggerating here, and some people listening to this probably saying, why are you guys adding fuel to the flames? That's kind of what people do, isn't it? Content creators need views. I don't know. But it's an interesting one. I think, we've got a dynamic here where Esteban Ocon, obviously, he'll have the world of confidence after what happened last season. And to be fair to him, he did a very good job. He was pretty good last season. Weren't quite as good as Fernando, but he was the one getting the results. When Fernando had reliability troubles, Esteban was picking up the points and played a huge part in making sure that Alpine finished P4 in the Constructors' Championship, arguably more so than Fernando. The scoreboard doesn't lie in that regard. So, we talked about this with Hamilton and Russell. There are obviously going to be caveats, but at the end of the day, you do need to pick up those points. Esteban certainly did that. You're going to put him up against a driver like Pierre Gasly, who 2022 was very much a moot season for him, was by far from his best. But I think you can be fair to him in saying that he's probably checked out mentally with that team after everything that had happened over the last few years with them and Red Bull, and the fact that the car was an absolute dog of a car, with all due respect. He's moving into a bigger team this season. This is his big opportunity to really show what he can do after all those years of wondering, will he get back to a big team again? Will he not? Was his best opportunity already gone? He's going to be up against a driver that knows a lot about him. He will know a lot about. And both of them in the same kind of dynamic, really. They're two drivers that, for different reasons, were looked favourably by bigger teams. Maybe not so much anymore, but they have an opportunity to establish themselves in a team that has huge aspirations going forward. And they're certainly going to want to be at the helm of that. So there's a lot that can be said on this, and a lot that I've probably tried to say on this. But Lee, I want to get your insight on this one as well, because whilst this could be a very fiery partnership between the two of them, I think that could bring the best out of both of them and perhaps bring them to that level that I think a lot of us hope they would be, but haven't quite seen enough of yet.
Well, I'm going to answer that in two parts. Firstly, I can't wait for next year's Drive to Survive. That's going to be juicy. And secondly, is I agree with you. I think although do have a rivalry in the past in lower categories, which is that's a fact that they haven't got on in the past. Is we can just look at other teams that have had the fierceness of a internal fight and where it pushes them. I'm just going to go to Lewis and Nico on this, who were friends when they started, but the close fight they had and trying to be that number one in that team pushed them both to levels they probably wouldn't have done before they were teammates. And I agree. I think Esteban and Pierre are going to be a great team pairing, not because they're going to get on, but because they're going to push each other, as you said. The only thing I question is, does Alpine have the capacity to handle a fierce rivalry internally? I'm not sure they have that ability to handle that. I think, unfortunately, it's going to blow up in their faces. I love to be proven wrong because it is very hard to manage and maintain an in-house fight, be it not even championship, but an in-house fight or in-team fight. And I just don't think even the best teams can't handle it. I don't think Alpine will be able to maintain it.
Well, we've seen even the best team principals and team bosses really struggle to manage two drivers that are fighting each other all the time for control of the team. And, you know, we've got a situation here with Otmar Szafner where he's no stranger to this sort of situation. If anything, he should be more experienced and appropriately equipped to deal with this than anybody else on the grid, arguably. I mean, the constant does seem to be Esteban Ocon, not implying blame here on his part, but every time this sort of thing happens, Ocon has been one of the two drivers involved. We could see that again this year. And I guess the question we should be answering, or asking in this case, Courtney, is can Otmar Szafner deal with these two if they start being at loggerheads with each other?
I think the other thing that comes into mind is the fact that they're obviously both French in a French team. So the chatter within, the French media, the French fan base is only going to amplify any sort of bad feeling that may develop between the two drivers. So I actually think that this driver pairing is probably going to be the most difficult that Otmar's actually had to deal with, because there's going to be a lot of conflict of interest going on within this team. And what I'm really looking forward to seeing is not only how the drivers react, but how the strategists and the team themselves respond when both of these drivers end up close together on track on a Sunday, because that first sort of altercation between those two drivers could define where each driver goes in terms of the pecking order. And we all know how it goes. When a new driver joins a team, both are keen to gain the initiative right away. So that's what I'm rubbing my hands in glee, waiting for, is when they first... I'm hoping Bahrain, straight away, first race, I want to see some track battling between them two, because if it goes anywhere near the way I think it is, I think that Alpine's going to be one of the main talking points of 2023.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we've often talked about this show about how difficult it can be on the inside of a team that is subject to being a national institution like Ferrari. We're certainly going to get that with Alpine next season, being the all-brand French team, the Renault engine, the two French drivers. I mean, it couldn't get any better than that if you're French, after all. I mean, unless Alain Prost was running the team, but, you can't have everything in that regard. Lauren Rossi, I'm sure, will do just fine in that regard. A quick word on Gasly, of course. We should talk about how what we're expecting from him this season coming, being Alpine, because, during his Red Bull time, whilst it wasn't great for him, one thing that was often said about him was his reaction, or how he dealt with certain adversity, and that how he fell out with the upper management and certain personnel in the team by being a bit too brash or a bit too demanding in certain regards. He would have had time to learn how to deal with that better at Alpha Tauri under Franz Tost tutorage as well. He's now moving into a team where he's going to have to try and establish himself there and demand to a certain degree certain things that should be coming to him rather than just subsiding and being a yes man in a team. So there's a lot to look at there. I mean, how do you think he's going to deal with that? Because he can't go into Alpine in the way that he obviously fell out with Red Bull, because it's not going to last 5 minutes for him. He's going to have to go in there with a more mature outset and know when to pick and choose his battles.
Yeah, he's definitely going to have to go be mature in how he approaches it. But Pierre, apart from last season, and obviously his stint at Red Bull, you've seen the steady improvement of Pierre as the driver and how he handles himself through a Grand Prix weekend. If the Red Bull stint, he just couldn't get onto that car. And last year, you could argue it was the car more than him. So I'm really looking forward to how he recomposes himself for this year. And ignoring Esteban, just him as a driver, how he puts himself forward and how he handles the car, new team, integrating the new team. Hopefully he handles it better than the Red Bull change. And really nice to see him get back to the Pierre that we saw pre-22. He's fighting he's top 5 contender, just taking that car into places that you don't expect to be in the performance level for the weekend. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that one. Quick one on Alpha Tauri. There's not much there's not too much to say about them so far from what we know. I mean, they've got a new driver lineup with Tsunoda back again for his 3rd season in the team. Nick De Vries obviously earning an opportunity in that team after his stellar performance in Monza last season for the Williams team. And it's a team as well that I think, if the car isn't great like it was last season, I think they could really struggle. It's a driver lineup that has talent, but definitely boasts of inexperience to measure, without an outstanding driver to try and carry him over in the same way as we saw someone like Alex Albon at Williams, for example, or Pierre Gasly, what was there before at AlphaTauri. So, I mean, what are we expecting from them this season? This could be quite a big year for them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a big season for Yuki Tsunoda, because, the way we've been talking about Lando, this is going to be like the first season where maybe he's thinking of taking on a leadership role with the team. But at the same time, it's a unique situation, because although Nick De Vries is fairly new to F1, he is a very experienced driver. Obviously, won the F2 series. He won the Formula E series as well. So he's experienced in multiple facets of motorsport. So it's gonna be interesting to see how quickly Nick De Vries settles in and how that partnership's going to work. Because for me, I go through every team, and the AlphaTauri partnership is the one that I can't quite put my finger on. I just don't quite know how that dynamic's going to work out, because, as you said, even though Nick De Vries is very much experienced in other aspects of the sport, that F1 element to it over the course of a season is yet to be seen. But from what we saw, the glimpses that he put in for Williams, and even didn't he do a practice session for Aston Martin as well?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he drove half the cars on the grid.
Yeah, so, and he did a good job. He was consistent. So he does have that on his CV already. He has that going for him. But it is, I just don't quite know how that dynamic's going to work out. Who's going to be the number one driver for that? Like, with all the other teams, I have a good idea, but for them, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because Yuki is the more experienced F1 driver in that regard, so you think he would take that mantle. But Yuki, to this day, has been decent, but I feel that there needs to be more from him to convince me that he's an outright number one driver. As I said, Courtney, I think this is one of those where, because of De Vries' talent and experience, and even though he was in F1 a little bit later than he would have liked, I think that certainly is worth noting as well. So I think they're going to be on an equal status, in the same way perhaps that Gasly and Tsunoda were, although I think we knew Gasly was more considered the number one anyway out of the two. I feel for 2024, there is a seat up for grabs in this team. I'm not quite sure who's going to get it. It's more likely going to be someone like Liam Lawson, if I was to have a bet, depending on how he gets on in Formula 2 next season. So I think we have to keep an eye on that. As I said, it will be interesting. Regarding the car, I do want to paint a focus on this as well, because it was dreadful last season. There was a lot of emphasis on the fact that AlphaTauri wanted to go a different way to just being a Red Bull B team. It didn't work. What are we expecting this season, guys? Lee, I'm going to come to you on this one because there is an argument here to be made where AlphaTauri, if they want to find some short-term games to maximise the number of listed parts they can get from Red Bull and adopt a similar concept to what they had within the rules. Of course, they can't share information in the way that some people may think they can in the past, but they definitely can't do that. Or do they stick to their guns and try to go at it alone again, but just do a better job than they did last season?
Personally, I think the financials will take priority, and by saying financials take priority, I mean finish the Constructors' Championship finishing, and the easiest way to do that, as you said, is to restore that close working relationship with Red Bull and buy the listed parts. I think that's probably what they're going to try and pursue. Obviously, I don't think they'll build a carbon copy of Red Bull, but they will. They're going to. I reckon they will abandon their last year's car and their design, and they'll base as much as they can around the Red Bull, and go from there, because that will maximize their revenue for the end of the year. And I think that's what's going to drive their decision making.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we saw last season that was quite notable with their car launch was that they went differently on the rear suspension design of their car and the rear bodywork that went with that to the Red Bull. They went at it alone, and it turned out to be the worst thing possible, because the Red Bull rear suspension was the best thing by far on the grid and was a huge contributor to their performance, to the point where probably almost everybody's going to be adopting a similar variation of that to a certain degree. So it's an interesting one. I completely agree with that one. I wouldn't be surprised if AlphaTauri tried to go their own way again, but if they want that short-term improvement and they don't want to finish P9 again, and even looking over their shoulder at Williams, for example, I think they need to be careful in how they adopt their 2023 concept. Speaking of concepts, I think we should have a quick mention on the cars for next season. We talked about this a little bit in part one, but I kind of want to expand on this a little bit. The second year of a new set of rule regulations, these rules have been said to be very prescriptive, and we've seen certain innovations to a degree, like the Aston Martin rear wing, the Mercedes vanes on the front wing, for example, the flexi floors as well, all of them being outlawed one way or another. Because of that, guys, are we expecting too much variation or innovation on these new cars, or is there a fear perhaps that they may just try and follow what the best cars were doing and then all end up trying to align themselves? Will that close the field up as well? What are your thoughts on that?
I think naturally we'll probably see an alignment. Not quite sure if it'll happen right away, but traditionally you have the big regulation change. A team comes up right out of the blocks. We saw it with Braun in 2009, Mercedes in 2014, and we saw it with Red Bull and Ferrari in 2022. But after that, we saw the other teams slowly but surely closing up. And I think the thing that gives me the most encouragement in terms of us having great battles is that we've already seen a very tight midfield battle in particular. If that closes up even more, we could be in for a stonker of a season. So actually, I know in one sense, you don't want to be seeing it become like too predictable. But I feel that if they're closing up in the way that they usually do, and even if they were that close in 2022, let's hope, because I feel that there are some drivers out there that really haven't had the opportunity to showcase how good they are. And if these teams close in, it's going to be a massive opportunity. Going back to somebody like Lando Norris, if the pack closes in, it's going to be an opportunity for him to get a elusive race win, for example.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people, when these rules were introduced, were concerned that we were going to turn up on a grid, and if you painted every car the same colour, you wouldn't be able to tell one from another. Luckily, we didn't get that, and I suppose with any rule set, there's always a concern that teams will naturally evolve their cars based on what they've learned from watching the best cars. Now, we saw a little bit of this last season. We saw, particularly with Red Bull and Ferrari, there were teams trying to copy certain innovations. We saw Haas with the louvres on the bodywork that we saw with Ferrari that looked like bathtubs. We saw Aston Martin, McLaren, Williams, even Mercedes to a degree adopting certain concepts of the Red Bull, particularly the side pods, not so much Mercedes, but the other teams definitely adopted their own version of that. And these are the sorts of things that I think people look at in terms of the detail and certain innovations that get interpreted in different ways to try and find performance. I suppose the positive we should look at in this regard, and why perhaps it may not be so blatantly obvious that we're going to see potentially 10 cars all look alike within a year or two at this point, despite these rule changes being quite prescriptive from what we've been told, is that we see Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, 3 teams, more Ferrari and Red Bull in this regard, but for the benefit of the example, I'm going to go with Mercedes too because their car is so unique, but 3 teams towards the back end of last season that were very close in performance, but on 3 different sides of the spectrum. In terms of where they went on concept. We had Mercedes, which had virtually no side pods. Ferrari with these bathtub-like side pods that were quite wide. Red Bull's was a little bit more compact and a lot more efficient in that regard. But 3 different design concepts and achieving a very similar level of performance at their peaks. So I think that is quite encouraging. You know, it's a lot better than what I think a lot of us feared, where we were going to see all these cars look exactly the same based on what the concepts or the early interpretations suggested they would do. I mean, what do you reckon, Lee?
Well, I agree. That the 3 different top teams come in with different concepts that were on their peak. They were race-winning cars. So it does hold hope. And yes, this year there may be some closing of the differences, but I do want to remind you about the changing, obviously, the floor edges. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is 1 or 2 teams that come up with slightly different interpretation of how they handle the floor edges or the gaps in the floor. And, you know, that I'm way too technical for me to even imagine right now, but I'm sure engineer has come up with how they change it, and where the FIA go, I'm not sure about that. I have to go and check the rule book. And I'm sure that will happen at some point this season. I know you look at a car and the first thing you don't look at is the floor edges because that doesn't hit you in the face. But that's what engineers will be looking at each other's cars, and especially at the beginning of the season and testing.
Yeah, of course. And I think the one thing we're going to see in testing is if someone turns up with something that looks absolutely crazy and they're lighting up the timesheets, I'm looking at you, Red Bull, they're going to be flipping that car upside down and seeing what it's got. Is it complying with these new regulations? I mean, Nicholas Tombassis as well, former technical head at the FIA, he was saying that these cars could lose up to half a second in performance compared to what we had last season, which is quite a lot, but I'm expecting the teams to make up that time. And again, it also depends on the level of evolution we get with these new cars. Will they be able to find much more time? You know, will we get to a point where these cars peak and the gains that we make are going to be very minimal to the point where we may end up with a very close championship, which sounds great, but that sounds more like something we may get towards 25, 26 when these rule sets are coming to an end. So certainly fun to talk about, and certainly something that's beyond our realms of understanding, I think it's probably fair to say, and we need a more technical head like Bryson or Craig Scarborough or someone like those guys to really enlighten us muggles, if you like, on what is going to make these F1 cars tick coming forward. But I'm sure we'll get one of them on in the future to tell us all about that as the season goes on. I want to move on to Haas. Now, this is going to be a fun partnership. Now, what was it? 5-6 years ago, Hungarian Grand Prix, the famous suck my balls comment from K-Mag to Hülkenberg. The two of them are going to be reunited in this team. We heard Gunther Steiner saying he was not going to be worried at all about whether or not these two are going to get along, and I'm pretty sure he'll be well stocked up on brand new doors. For anyone watching Drive to Survive will understand that reference, to make sure that things go smoothly between these two. What do we think, guys? 2 drivers kind of in the same boat, trying to rebuild and resurrect their F1 careers again. K-Mag did a great job of it last season at the expense of Mick Schumacher. Hülkenberg coming in, probably last chance saloon for him to prove that he's still got what it takes. How is it going to go between these two? And also, is the car going to be able to cope with the demands of 2 drivers really looking to make a name for themselves?
I think I'd be hoping that Nico Hülkenberg stays away from the drama, because they've brought him in to be Mr. Reliable. You know, that's what comes with Hülkenberg, that reliability, that consistency. So I'll be hoping that he can stay clear of that. But as we've seen in the past, all it takes is one incident and then things sort of get out of hand very quickly. And I'm sure Gunther Steiner is fed up of having toxic traits within his team. So who knows? They've matured. It was 2-3 years ago. Maybe they've matured a lot since then. Maybe that's wishful thinking. But again, they all start off as friends at the beginning of the season, and it all quickly changes if one of them isn't performing to the level they want to, and they come together on track, and then the conspiracy theories start that one driver's getting advantage over the other. So again, the way we've been talking about Alpine, Haas are definitely a dynamic that we need to be keeping an eye on this year.
Yeah, and I think another thing we need to remember as well with Haas is that this is a team that's very much operated with one of the smallest budgets in the sport, a very small outfit and a small team, and this season's going to be different. They've got a new title sponsor, MoneyGram, and, so much so that that's on the logo of the car, and apparently as well, that's going to give them the injection of cash that they need to meet the budget cap for the first time. So that's a huge statement of intent for Haas here. And this is a team that has often had to do very, very well with what they've had. And to be fair to them, they've done relatively well. So I guess, Lee, we should be excited about Haas. Perhaps they finally are going to be able to operate on the same level as the other teams. And given what they've done with what they've had, that's got to be encouraging for them to potentially stake a claim for being up there at one of the top teams in the midfield if they get it right.
Yeah, well, firstly, you remember last year how quickly Haas came out of the blocks. So, I mean, they could come out this year and quick and develop. But it's good to hear that they're going to meet the budget cap. I mean, a lot of teams are announcing they're going to be meeting the budget cap this season, which hopefully bodes well for a very intense midfield fight. But Haas, I think, with the injection of cash, as Courtney already said, they want the reliability from Nico, not crashing, which was a key thing why Mick lost his seat, and using the money to develop the car. And as the season goes on, and two experienced drivers in the development, for once, we may not see Haas drop off in performance. They actually may gain performance through the season, which will be really enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I think so too. And I would really like to see Haas, for everybody that does a great job there, not just because we love Gunther Steiner, but there's a lot of great people behind the scenes as well that really deserve to be working in a team that isn't really held back or running a race with one foot tied to the other. So I'm hoping for their sake it's going to be a good season for them. And who knows, we now get to see Haas without the handbrake on, no pun intended. We'll wait and see how that works out for them. Not always a guarantee that it's going to work, but, we'll have to wait and see for them. Alfa Romeo. Courtney, your favourite team. For anyone that's listened to this show will know Courtney absolutely loves Alfa Romeo, so I'm not even going to ask the question, Courtney. I'm just going to say to you, Alfa Romeo 2023, off you go.
I think the only sort of life that will be within that team is the prospect of Audi taking over. The sooner that takeover happens, the better. I think that team is in need of a real restart, and it looks like it's coming. Thank goodness for that. I think the Andreas Seidel situation is probably the main point of interest within that team. But look, he's only just joined. He isn't going to make an impact right away. But I think Valtteri Bottas would be very happy with the developments happening behind the scenes, because he might get an opportunity to showcase his talents again, because it's Lewis Hamilton, he still his team. And it's just important for Valtteri that he doesn't become, a forgotten part of the F1 grid, because we know on his day he's still a great driver. So he'll be hoping that he gets his second chance to show what he can do. And if Audi sort of, bring in what they're going to bring in, maybe Valtteri Bottas will get his second chance. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there is room for excitement and enthusiasm at the team. Of course, Andreas Seidel as the CEO is going to be a great appointment, probably the best possible candidate to replace Fred Vasseur. I imagine he's going to be involved in the running of the team in the short term whilst the Audi process starts to take shape and all the infrastructure and everything that comes with their introduction into the sport in 2026 takes a bit more shape. So, there is reason to be hopeful. As you mentioned already, Valtteri Bottas, second season with the team. Actually, not second season with the team. What am I talking about? Actually, no. What am I talking about? It is the second season with the team.
It is the second season.
Yeah, sorry. It's been a long day. I'm losing my mind on this one. But obviously, a lot to expect from him after fading away a little bit. But obviously, it didn't really matter because those early season performances was enough to get them P6 in the Constructors' Championship. I feel like this is a team that's more likely to go down rather than up in the midfield. But I don't think we should sell them short in this regard. You know, they are a team that can produce a good car. They managed to do that. They did get their act together with some upgrades towards the end of the season, which helped them, you know, solidify that P6 in the Constructors' Championship. We've also got Zhou Guan Yu in his second season. You know, the Rookie of the Year in a class of one, but still counts. Obviously, a lot more is going to be expected of him. What are your thoughts regarding Alfa Romeo, Lee? Is this a team that could be on the up in 2023, or do you think they should be looking over their shoulder?
I think they're going to be the potential going up. And
Ooh,
I'm saying
okay.
that because if I recall, they're going to reach the budget cap this season.
Hey.
So it's another team that's replying with Haas, that Haas going up, and it's another team that's going to be reaching the budget cap. So I don't expect them to fall away as the season goes on. Obviously, it's the start of the trickle of some investment from Audi to build up the team and the car. It's also the last season of Alfa Romeo in the sport. So there is obviously the loss of the heritage that Alfa Romeo disappearing from the sport again. So that is sad to see that happening from a historical Formula One point. But the team, I think they have the potential to go up, just like Haas. As you've already touched on, Valtteri, he can have a strong car season with the car there, and Zhou, especially if China does happen or not. But if it does happen, he could be on fire, especially at his home Grand Prix if it does end up happening. So it has all the potential to go the right way. It could go down because it's going to be such a tight midfield this season.
Yeah, I mean, like the two AlphaTauri drivers, I think Zhou, you know, for right or wrong, is a driver that I think is going to be under pressure to deliver this season. You know, he had his rookie season. He did put together some performances. There was a time towards the end of the season where he was very close to what Bottas was doing. Whether Bottas had mentally checked out, we don't know, or just Zhou had upped his game. Probably a bit of both, I think is fair to say. But with all the confusion and all the uncertainty regarding the future of the Chinese Grand Prix, I feel that this is a driver whose main stake in his position in the sport is not guaranteed. And I think as a result of that, we never got that long-term commitment to him that we was expecting. It was 1 year deal and then another year on top of that. And there are drivers out there that will be keeping an eye on his seat. I mean, Teo Porcher is someone that I'm pretty sure Sauber, for as long as they continue to exist before Audi takes over, will very much look to want to put him in that seat at some point, whether that be 2024 or later. We'll have to wait and see. In your mind, guys, what does Zhou Guanyu have to do to confirm that he is definitely good enough to be in the seat beyond 2023? And more importantly, do you think he can handle it?
I think if he does exactly what he did last season, he'd be okay. Because I do think the fact that he's Chinese, and obviously the Chinese market does play a role in this. If he does a steady job for this steady team, that's what you need to do when you're at Alfa Romeo. Just play it safe, and you'll keep your seat. I think they'll end up finishing 11th and 12th. That's my first pre-season prediction. So if he finishes 11th or 12th, he's done enough.
Yeah, fair enough. Last thing before we sign off on this one. Obviously, there's been a lot of uncertainty regarding the empty slot in the F1 calendar right now, where the Chinese Grand Prix was in there before, obviously, issues with the pandemic and the restrictions and, you know, stuff like that was going on. That's all been lifted rather miraculously. Now, I'm not going to get into the detail with that, but what it does mean is that because of the fact that these restrictions have been lifted, there is the possibility that China could suddenly become a part of the F1 calendar again this season. And I think we can all agree that a Chinese Grand Prix would be a very good thing for Formula One. There are obvious concerns over the relative safety of the teams and drivers and everything go with that. And again, we're not going to get into the detail with that one. I think we've talked long enough about the pandemic and everything else that's come with that on this show. And it is a sports show, of course, so we don't want to make this political. But there is obviously that concern there. Other venues have been mentioned. Portimao has been cited as a potential Grand Prix for next season to go on there. I know they talked about Istanbul again. That's always a Grand Prix waiting in the wings to go on. But there are other circuits as well. So I kind of want to throw something out there. Rather than ask the question of what you guys think will happen, I would like to ask you what you want to happen. If there's a circuit that you would love to fill that slot, we didn't have to worry about seasonal conditions or money or anything like that. We just had a race there. where are we going, guys? What do you want to see included onto this calendar in this empty slot? Lee, I'm going to come to you first.
Well, it is a tough one, to be honest. But for me, Istanbul Park would be my preferred choice. Kuala Lumpur was pretty up there, but Istanbul Park is, for me, is the nice preferred circuit to come onto the season.
Courtney, what about you, mate?
I was going to say Istanbul as well, but let's hope they resurface that circuit, because let's remember was it 2020? Yeah, it was, wasn't it? 2020 with the recently resurfaced track followed by the rain. It was Greece. It was like an ice rink for most of the weekend. You know, there was also that entertainment element to it, but it was almost comical at times.
Yeah,
so if they've got a couple of years to get that surface right, it's a fantastic circuit. Plenty of great memories there. I would love to see. Completely agree with you, Lee. I'm fully with you on that one. I'm going with Istanbul.
Yeah, it was a great little circuit, that one. I've always liked Istanbul, and as you said, Courtney, that 2020 race was brilliant. We had pretty much everything. We had Lance Stroll on pole position. At one point, we thought he was going to win the race. Lewis Hamilton making that incredible strategy work by staying on the intermediate tyres when the track was greasy. Max Verstappen looking quick, but making mistakes left, right, and centre, not really keeping it together. We also had as well, Lewis winning his 7th world title on that day, I believe it was as well, which was a big thing for him at the time as he was chasing all kinds of records. We had, Sebastian Vettel's final podium for Ferrari, which he inherited after Charles Leclerc bottled a P2 when he tried to overtake Perez on that final lap. And Ocon with the nose stopper as well, getting in the points for, was it Renault or Alpine? I can't remember what the name was. It Alpine then, or was it Renault?
I think it was Renault.
Yeah, it's probably Renault back then. I can't remember, because was it blue Renault, wasn't it? I don't know. I'm remembering a different race now, but
it was Renault. Yeah, I think it was Renault.
Someone's going to tell me that was probably the 2021 race. But look, it probably was, now that I think about it, actually. But look, never mind. All I'm trying to say is Istanbul brought up a lot of great racing, and it's a worthy candidate to be put on the calendar. I do want us to go to Kuala Lumpur again. I miss Malaysia. And look, if it buckets down with rains and we end up with monsoon season, we can finally trial the F1 Duck Championship. We can make that a thing.
I'd like to say, because I saw someone, I think it might be, was it Bryson? I don't know. Someone retweeted it or mentioned it online about, would we like to see a night race there? I'd absolutely love to see a night race. The circuit itself is fantastic. With the monsoon thing, in one sense, it's unpredictable, it's brilliant. But I remember 2009 is saying over old. I remember these kind of things. 2009 when they end up with half points because the rain was that bad. And I'm no expert on the climate around Indonesia, but I'm assuming they usually get the monsoon during the day and then overnight it becomes drier. So if there's a dry race of an evening, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'd love to see a night race at somewhere like Malaysia. I think it was Bryce, and he's usually good
for Malaysia. I said Indonesia.
Yeah, that's all right. I just let it go over. I'm sure our listeners probably will do too. Obviously, honest mistake anyway, but basically, yeah. I would love to see F1 go back there. I know people say, what about Kyalami? I don't want Kyalami just to be a charity case and have a one-off race and that be it. I want that to be a serious option, and hopefully it will be in years to come. So it'd be great if they could sort something out there. But yeah, I'd love to see F1 go back to Sepang. But let us know, guys, where would you like to see F1 go to fill that slot if the Chinese Grand Prix doesn't get reinstated on the calendar for 2023? But I think that's all we've got time for. I think that's kind of the majority of the big stories that we've covered on this one. And let us know your thoughts on the topics we've discussed. If you didn't check out part 1, make sure to do that. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on your favourite podcasting platform. It's right there. Give it a listen. Let us know what you think. But yeah, that's all we got time for, guys. As always, thank you so much for supporting us on the show. We've got a lot planned for this season, so I'm really looking forward to going through all of that. And I really hope you can join us on that journey. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, help us get to 1,000 subs. Try and do that before the start of the season if we can. Bit ambitious, but we'll see if we can do it. Give us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting platform, part of the Sports Social Podcast Network. We're hoping to grow and grow and grow this year. We need your support to help us do that. And of course, we've got more great content with more great guests coming very, very soon. But until then, guys, that's been all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please stay safe as always. And until next time, thank you so much for listening in, as always, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And as always, remember one thing, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care, guys.
See you soon.
Bye.